Hello, and welcome to Secondhand. Today we look at the U.S. sanctions on the Japanese president of the International Criminal Court and at how Japan reacted. In August 2026, the United States imposed sanctions on a Japanese citizen. Tomoko Akane, president of the International Criminal Court, the permanent court that tries war crimes. Japan's government answered with two words: very unfortunate. And at home, criticism erupted across the political spectrum, calling that answer weak. But unpack the word weak, and the real question turns out to be about actions, not words. Let's take it step by step. First, the timeline. On August 18th, the U.S. State Department designated Tomoko Akane, the president of the ICC, for sanctions. The next day, Japan's foreign ministry said, through its press secretary, that the measures were very unfortunate. Criticism of that response then spread, not just from the opposition, but from the governing party's own side. And on August 21st, Akane herself commented that support from Japan and the Japanese people would be an important key. 3 questions for today. First, why did the backlash spread this far, across Japan's usual political divides? Second, why did the government stop at the words "very unfortunate" instead of demanding a withdrawal? And third, what actions from here on would actually show whether Japan is being weak? Let's start with what happened. First, the American side. The sanctions came in a statement under Secretary of State Marco Rubio, designating President Akane and a senior trial lawyer, Abdoulaye Saye. The ICC, in one sentence, is the international court that tries individuals, not states, for the gravest crimes. We will come back to it in detail. The sanctions freeze any assets in the United States and bar transactions with U.S. persons and the U.S. financial system. That is not symbolic. Reports spelled out that credit cards, bank accounts, and American internet services could stop working for the people designated. So what did Washington actually say? The statement called the ICC a corrupt and politicized court, and the court shot back that this was a flagrant attack on judicial independence. The stated reason for the designation: direct engagement in efforts to prosecute officials of governments that have not consented to the court's jurisdiction. No specific decision by Akane was named. The statement also said Washington expects other countries to end their funding of and participation in the court. With this round, 9 of the court's 18 judges are under U.S. sanctions. Now, Japan's response. The Foreign Ministry's press secretary said Japan has consistently supported the ICC, and from that position the measures are very unfortunate. The statement also said Japan would keep working on the rule of law while communicating with related countries. Prime Minister Sanai Takaichi echoed that line to reporters. What Japan did not do was demand a withdrawal. Asked directly whether it would, Foreign Minister Toshimitsu Motegi did not answer, saying only that Japan had made various approaches to the United States before. The criticism crossed party lines. The largest opposition party called the response entirely insufficient, and a former cabinet minister from the governing Liberal Democratic Party said the government should speak more sternly to Washington. A cross-party group of lawmakers went further, condemning the sanctions in the strongest terms as a grave violation of the rule of law. And once reports spelled out the practical damage, the frozen cards and accounts, the criticism flared again. In the middle of all this, Akane herself spoke. On August 21st, through the publisher of her book, she said the sanctions were something she had expected to a degree and had not surprised her. What mattered, she said, was preventing this from becoming the beginning of the end of the international rule of law, and that support from Japan and the Japanese people would be an important key. She did not spell out what that support should look like, but the sanctioned person herself has now named Japan and called its support a key. Here is the background you need on the ICC. The International Criminal Court tries individuals, not countries, for the gravest crimes: war crimes, genocide, crimes against humanity. It sits in The Hague, in the Netherlands. It is a different body from the International Court of Justice, the UN court that handles disputes between states, and as it happens, Japanese nationals currently head both courts. The ICC was created by a treaty called the Rome Statute. 125 countries are members. The United States, Russia, China, and Israel are not. And here is the crucial part. The court has no police force and no tax base of its own. Arrests and money both depend on its member states. So when Washington asks other countries to stop funding the court, that goes beyond sanctions on individuals. It shakes the court's foundations. Akane is a former Japanese prosecutor who, in 2024, became the first Japanese national elected president of the court. Her term runs to March 2027. Among those member states, Japan holds a special position. Japan pays the largest share of the court's budget, around 15% in recent years. In the 2023 budget, it was 15.9%. Germany is second at 11.4%. France is third at 8.5%. Part of the reason is structural. The big contributors, the United States, China, Russia, are simply not members, which pushes Japan to the top. Japan has also supplied judges without interruption since 2007. For a foreign policy built around the phrase, the rule of law, the ICC is one of the institutions that gives that slogan an address. It has not been unconditional support, either. When the court's chief prosecutor was removed for misconduct in July, Japan took part in the process and welcomed it. So how has America dealt with this court? The honest answer: back and forth. In 2020, the first Trump administration sanctioned the ICC's prosecutor over an investigation touching U.S. forces in Afghanistan. In 2021, the Biden administration lifted those sanctions, calling them inappropriate and ineffective. In 2023, when the court issued an arrest warrant for Russia's President Putin, President Biden called it justified. The turn came in November 2024, when the court issued warrants for Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu. From February 2025, the Trump administration brought sanctions back, designating judges and prosecutors in stages, down to President Akane in August 2026. When the person at the top is all talk, fewer public servants are going to take on risky work. That line comes from the most widely shared Japanese post about these sanctions. Now for the Japanese reactions. In a survey of the most shared posts on X, done for the source article, roughly 8 in 10 opinion posts criticized the government's response. And notably, the usual left-right divide barely formed. One of the sharpest rebukes came from an editorial in the Yomiuri, Japan's big conservative daily. Here is that most shared post in full. Akane was sanctioned for doing nothing more than her job. She loses her credit cards, her ebooks, even her bank account. 6 months ago, the Prime Minister promised her support to her face. Now there is no relief measure, only the words, very unfortunate. When the top is all talk, fewer public servants take on risky work. A military affairs blogger seized on the government's own reasoning. People around the Prime Minister reportedly said the sanctions were not aimed at Japan. A Japanese national just happened to head the ICC. His reply, appalling. What kind of conservatism abandons its own? And an author shared the Yomiuri editorial with a note that its language was sharper than he had ever seen. Japan is the largest funder and sent Akane to the court with the other members, trust. Yet the Prime Minister stopped at very unfortunate. Defenses of the government's quiet approach did exist, but mostly as explanations of a dilemma, rarely as a case anyone made with conviction. So, is the criticism fair, and what could Japan actually do? That is the analysis. A week after the United States sanctioned Japan's ICC president, Tokyo has announced no countermeasures, no demand for withdrawal, and no new support package as of August 24th. The words "very unfortunate" drew criticism from ruling and opposition parties alike. But whether Japan is being weak cannot be measured by the strength of its words, because there are still options Japan could pursue without a head-on clash with its ally. And Akane herself has said that support from Japan will be an important key. Use the tools or stop at words. The answer will show in what Japan does next. There are at least 4 steps Japan could consider without condemning the United States by name. 1. Upgrade the statement. So far, very unfortunate has come from the press secretary, not from the foreign minister, the chief cabinet secretary, or the prime minister. In diplomacy, who says a thing changes its weight? 2. Sign the next joint statement. In February 2025, 79 ICC member states expressed unwavering support for the court. Japan was not among them. Signing the next one would state a position through action. 3. Guidance for Japanese banks. A U.S. executive order has no direct legal force inside Japan. The government could say so clearly, so that Japanese financial institutions do not overcomply and freeze Akane's accounts on their own. Though this one is not simple, for banks with US dollar business and American exposure, how far such guidance would protect them is genuinely uncertain. 4. Keep funding the court and keep supporting Akane's work in practice. Since Washington is asking countries to stop funding the ICC, continuing to fund it is itself a signal, a quiet way of declining that request. Why could Japan act without clashing with its ally? The key is separating two questions. The first is jurisdiction. Can the court try nationals of countries outside the treaty for crimes on member state territory? The court says yes, but international lawyers genuinely disagree. The second is method, and it operates on a different level. The court's own system has legal routes for challenging jurisdiction or a warrant. Freezing the personal assets of the judges who handled a case so they cannot work sits outside those routes, and European governments in the court have criticized exactly that, as pressure on judicial independence. Japan is under no obligation to rebut an ally's reading of the law head-on. But it could, in principle, stay out of the jurisdiction dispute and still say it does not support the method of putting individual judges under financial sanctions. In fact, a State Department spokesperson said the sanctions were not directed at the Japanese government. Washington itself drew that line. Then again, Washington is asking allies to end their support for the court altogether, so the fear of being next in line has grounds too. Which reading you take changes the verdict. Back to our first question. Why did the backlash spread this far? Here is an uncomfortable fact. Through 2025, Washington sanctioned a British prosecutor and judges of several nationalities. Japan's government issued no dedicated statement then, and public reaction was close to nil. This time, the target is the Japanese president of the court herself, and the criticism erupted within days. Proximity is likely one reason the temperature changed. To be fair, the president's office carries more weight, media coverage differs, and a stronger reaction when your own citizen is hit is not unnatural. There is also a record on joint statements. Japan signed one by 94 countries in July 2024, then skipped the one issued after Washington moved to sanctions. None of this invalidates today's criticism, but it exposes a gap between the slogan, consistent support for the ICC, and the standard actually applied. Is Japan defending the court on principle, or as protection of its own national? That ambiguity sits underneath the charge of weakness. Question 2. Why did Tokyo stop at words? Japan's security rests on U.S. forces stationed in Japan and on American extended deterrence, the U.S. commitment, backed by its nuclear and conventional forces, to deter attacks on Japan. The government may well have calculated that publicly condemning that ally would carry a heavy price. A governing party lawmaker put the logic plainly. Picking a fight with the United States is not a good move. Washington, meanwhile, frames its ICC sanctions as a campaign against a threat and is asking countries to stop funding the court. Japan is the court's largest funder. Officials reportedly see little chance of changing the administration's stance, and worry that raising Japan's voice would read in Washington as defending a politicized court. Note that Akane is also on Russia's wanted list over the Putin arrest warrant. The president targeted by both Washington and Moscow is the one Japan, the top funder, is being asked to stand behind. Quiet diplomacy is not necessarily empty either. Even in Europe, where the words were stronger, the collective countermeasure has yet to be activated. But what Japan actually raised with Washington has not been made public, and no concrete security cost of protesting has been confirmed either. Neither the success nor the price of this course can be judged yet. One more piece of context. The same week, Japan faced a second charge of weakness from the opposite direction. On August 13th, President Putin visited Itorofu, one of 4 Russian-held islands off Hokkaido that Japan claims as its northern territories, the first such visit by a sitting Russian president. Japan's response there was verbally maximal, absolutely unacceptable, plus a formal summons of the Russian ambassador to protest. And yet, no measures followed there either. Tighter sanctions and a recall of Japan's ambassador were reportedly considered and did not happen. Japan has its reasons. It relies on Russia for about 9% of its LNG imports, holds stakes in the Sakhalin II energy project, and the former island residents, average age 89, are still hoping to visit family graves. So toward Moscow, the strongest words, toward Washington, the softest, and in both cases, a blank space after the words. That shared pattern is why 2 charges of weakness landed in a single week. Back to the three questions. 1. Why did the backlash spread so far? Because the target was Japan's own president of the court, and that exposed the gap between the slogan of consistent support and the standard actually applied. 2. Why did Tokyo stop at words? An alliance calculus with real grounds, but separate the jurisdiction dispute from the method, and options remain that avoid a head-on clash. 3. What should we watch? Actions, not words. Whether Japan signs the next joint statement, whether the statement rises to a minister, whether guidance for banks or a concrete support package appears. The governing party is reported to be planning further discussion of the U.S. response within the month. A country that made the rule of law its calling card is being tested on that card by its own ally. The answer will become visible in two forms: the next joint statement and what the support package actually contains. For the full written analysis, see the article linked in the description. If you found this useful, please like the video and subscribe. Thank you for watching.